Okay, here we are, episode 4 of Coffee Cup Stories with Jack. Today's coffee cup story is about my time at Nichols Research. Nichols was an engineering science company in Huntsville, Alabama, where they did lots and lots of work for the government, for the Department of Defense, and a little bit of work for NASA, and a very little bit of work for other people. Now, I had two tenures at Nichols, and today we'll talk about the first tenure. I went over there. I left quantum research where I was working for LOCAS, as I discussed last week, and I was going to go be on a super secret program. We call them black projects. We call them black projects because it's dark. Nobody can see anything about it. You're not allowed to know anything about what's happening if you're not, and we called it, read into the program. So if you needed to know about the program, they would take you to the security officer who was in charge of that program, and the program manager had to sign off that you were allowed to see the program information. Well, so you'd go see him, and he would brief you on what you were and weren't allowed to say. You'd sign some paperwork, and then you were allowed to know about the program. Then you would read a briefing about what the program was and did. And you couldn't talk about it to anybody who wasn't read in. Now, the reason for keeping a program black was because just knowing that it existed would make it useless. If the enemy even learned it existed, that would make it useless. At least that was the theory. A lot of times we said that programs had to be black because they couldn't stand the light of day. Because sometimes you get in there and you see these super secret programs, and you very quickly realize that if just normal congressmen knew about them, they'd get voted out pronto. But that's neither here nor there. So I left Quantum, I went to Nichols. This was the very early 90s, and this one was, I spent maybe 18 months there. I didn't spend very long there because it turns out that this black program that I'd gone to work on, which had been the darling of the House of Representatives, they kept giving it more and more and more money. They loved it. But because it was a black program, what that actually meant was that the very few people who were allowed to know what that was loved it. And everybody else just went along with them when they said, hey, this is great, this is awesome, you need to vote for this. Because you get there and you find out, oh my goodness. So what was it? Well, at the time it was called TSAM, Tri-Service Standoff Attack Missile. The Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, primarily the Air Force, wanted to build a stealth cruise missile. Stealthy, so the radars couldn't see it. And what they wanted it to do was they wanted it to go kill Soviet radar systems. Soviet Union was famous at the time for being heavily invested in radar-based air defense missile systems. So if you could knock out the radars, you made their air defense totally worthless. So the idea was, we'll build this stealth missile so the radars can't see it coming. You fly it into the radar system, blow it up, radar doesn't work. Now the Air Force can fly in unimpeded and do whatever they want. The Air Force loved that idea. The Navy loved that idea because they have planes flying in as well. The Army loved the idea because of our helicopters that have to work in the region. But they also wanted this missile to carry some other things other than anti radar warheads. But while this was one of those that if the Soviets even found out we were working on this, they would do things immediately to make it not effective anymore. So it had to be secret. It was also the other kind of black program. It was not able to stand the light of day. Because this thing had been started in 1986. They'd said, hey, they're going to cost about $700,000 a piece. But this system was so badly managed, and I mean so incredibly badly managed, that by the early 90s, 5 years later, they're really not close to a solution. They've wasted billions of dollars of money. They're going to cost more than 2.5 times what they were supposed to have cost, assuming we can get them to work. In 1991, the Army said, look, we're out. We're just out. This is not working. This is a bad idea. We're not going to throw bad money after good. We're out. Well, that raised some eyebrows in Congress. The GAO, that's the General Accounting Office, they went and they did an investigation. And yeah, the program was just killed. Well, this was about the time I came in on the program. So I came in, waited a few months for my clearance, and while I was waiting for my clearance to let me get on super secret program, I found out some guys were doing some work that was like the work I'd done for LOCAS, and so I got a job helping them a little bit. But then when this program gets canceled, I'm out of luck. I don't have my major source of funding anymore. The smart weapons stuff that was like LOCAS that I was doing, that was like 25%, maybe 30% of my hours. So I had to find a new job. And listen, I loved Nichols. I loved working for Nichols. But money's money, so I had to find a new job. Long story short, on TSAM is finally, after like 92 or something, they just totally canceled the program. It wasn't a complete waste because a lot of the technologies that they developed got put into some of the things that were built later and are still flying today. But yeah, it was a little bit of a panic-stricken situation for me. I leave this job and come over to this job, and in less than a year, my job gets canceled. Okay, I have a wife, I have 2 kids. Megan was, I think, newly born at this point. Woo! Young engineer, wife, 2 kids, house, 2 cars. He can't afford to take risks like that. So I went and I found my next job, which was at another local company, working back with my original boss from Quantum that I loved so much. We'll get to that one at some point. But yeah, just any time in the future I talk about black programs, remember that they're either black because nobody can know about them, or they're black because they can't stand the light of day. And this one couldn't stand the light of day. Blessings.